Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Kos The Brief. It's our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Melissas. I'm here with Carrie Eleveld, and today, given the lack of fresh indictments in the Trump case, although there's still investigations happening, we're not done with indictments yet. Hopefully, we got more of those coming.
Right.
But today we're going to talk about Ukraine. We haven't actually talked about Ukraine in a while, so Carrie thought it would be a good idea to sort of catch up, particularly since we're seeing both, there's finally action going on the battlefield, but also the Ukrainian issue is really deeply seeping into domestic politics, both presidential politics and also in Congress. So it's actually probably a great time to talk about Ukraine. And so Carrie is going to interview me.
Yay. Those who know me might realize that my voice doesn't sound like normal, doesn't have its usual beautiful lilt to it. But anyway, I'm just a little, I'm not super under the weather. I'm just a little under the weather, but my throat isn't long for the day here. So I thought, why not just interview Marcos, make him do all the talking. Also, he's like a genuine fountain of information on the Ukraine war and, with Russia, and does, 50, maybe 70% of our writing. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember on the topic. So, and we have a steady audience that's been super interested from the very start in the conflict. So it's kind of it's brought in a whole new readership. So in any case, let's start.
And actually, before you even start, Carrie, I just want to kind of sort of underscore that a little bit, because it's been very, very odd that historically Daily Kos began as an anti-war blog, and during the Iraq war, during George Bush's invasion of Iraq, and obviously liberal audiences have always been sort of Pentagon skeptic, arguing for smaller Pentagon budgets and suspicious of military leadership. And so it's been absolutely fascinating because of this war in Ukraine, seeing sort of that like absolutely flip-flop in American politics, where suddenly liberals are very aggressively defending the Pentagon and celebrating the emergence of American weapons in the war in Ukraine, and championing Ukraine's fight for its survival and for its own self-determination. And then on the Republican side, they become Russia-loving, Putin-loving. You have Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville literally has placed, in, I don't know, it's almost been a year now, hold on all military promotions. So we don't have leadership. We don't have anybody in charge of the Marine Corps or the Army, I believe, and it's causing real national security issues.
Just today, I think the heads, I'm not exactly sure if they were the head of every military branch, but like several of the heads of the military branch posted an op-ed in the Washington Post saying this is hurting our military readiness. So this is the head of these are the heads of our military, the military chiefs saying, we need to figure this out because this is hurting our military readiness, and this is a bad situation. And the idea a decade ago that this is where the Republican Party would be taking us, from a ruby red state in Alabama, that's the senator that's doing it. It's just crazy. It's mind-boggling. So anyway,
no, it absolutely is. And Republicans used to have this sort of very clearly defined brand that they were the party of national security, family values, and lower taxes. And they still, Trump got lower taxes in there, right? But it's amazing how they've surrendered to his MAGA movement that is actually harming American national security, to the point where liberals like us are going like, whoa, like, we want to see reforms, but this isn't exactly what we were talking about. Surrendering to Putin wasn't what we were talking about. And also, obviously, family values, where Trump has completely made a mockery of the whole idea of any kind of ethical, moral standing. And so it's absolutely fascinating. So you have Republicans actively undermining national security. And I know we're going to talk a lot, some later on in the show about that domestic side of things. So I'll save my soliloquies for then.
Okay, sounds good. Well, first of all, my burning question is, because we were hearing about the counteroffensive for so long, And then it seemed like, it was happening, it was moving slowly. Then there's sort of conflicting or murky reports about, well, maybe there's progress and maybe, like there seems sort of like different interpretations of what was going on. Not that it was necessarily bad, but like, wasn't this, we had that counteroffensive a year ago or over a year ago, I think, where if all of a sudden they
It was a
retook
year ago,
Kherson,
last fall.
right?
Yeah, last
Is that
fall.
right?
Hmm.
And
Kherson and
that was
Kharkiv.
like
Yeah.
in Kharkiv, and everybody was like, "Wow, that's amazing!" So, just bring us up to speed on where we are now. Are they making progress? And what do you think so far of the counteroffensive's effectiveness?
All right, let's go back to last fall because it's actually a good place to start. At the time, a general named Sergei uh, Surovikin. I don't know how they pronounce it. Surovikin took control of the Russian armed forces, and one of the first things that he did was retreat from Kherson, where Russian forces were isolated, cut off from supplies. There's only two bridges that were feeding them, and both bridges were destroyed by Ukraine. So he pulled out. So that was like what everybody like. Ooh, that was dramatic. Like, yay, go Ukraine. Second thing he did, though, was what has bedeviled Ukraine ever since, is he started creating a network of layered defenses all across a contact line. He realized that, and Russia did a winter offensive that they took Bakhmut after 9 months of bloody fighting, which is a strategically insignificant city in eastern Ukraine. But they were not able to really move, towards their strategic, objectives. And strategic, the difference between tactical is, I want to take that hill. Strategic is, why does it matter that I take that hill? And so taking Kiev would be a strategic objective. There's some cities. There's two large cities that are side by side. Uh, um, in the Donbas in eastern Ukraine that are Ukrainian held. If Russia captured those, it would be a strategic victory. That would mean that they would basically occupy all of eastern Ukraine. They never got close. Bakhmut was a tactical decision. There was really no strategic point other than Russia had some roads that made it easy to supply. I mean, that was basically it, right? So Russia was focused on Bakhmut, but the real Russian effort, what Surovikin was doing, was building these layered defenses, and he built them all across this front line. A couple thousand miles of front line, but he really laid them on thick in southeastern Ukraine, and that is around the cities of where the key Russian occupied cities of Mariupol, Tokmak, and Melitopol sit. And you don't have to remember, I'm not going to quiz you. But this is important because these cities are along what's called the land bridge. The land bridge connects mainland Russia to the Crimean Peninsula. Crimea is occupied by Russia since 2014. They are obsessed with keeping it. Ukraine is obsessed with taking it back. And it is incredibly strategically important. The Black Sea, basically, whoever has Crimea basically has full control of the Black Sea. So this land bridge, it's really the only strategic goal that Putin has been able to accomplish in this year and a half of war. So from the beginning, they knew that they had to protect it, and so Sorokin built multi-layers, between 4 and 7 layers, depending on how you count the various layers. But they're anti-tank emplacements, infantry trenches, physical barriers like these concrete pyramids. Like, it's just a whole, and that's just what we see. Every tree line in the approach has Russian defenses in it. I mean, it's been slow. So over the winter, as Russia really sort of bled at Bakhmut, and while Russia was building these layers of defenses, the West finally started sending modern armor, infantry fighting vehicles, and other weapons to Ukraine, and started training them on it, and built up these 12 new called Storm battalions that were designed, brigades that were designed to launch the counteroffensive in the spring. And so they spent all winter equipping them and training them. Now, supposedly they were going to learn Western style tactics. And Western style tactics is what's called combined arms. And combined arms warfare means that every sort of military type of discipline is working in concert, right? So you have artillery, you have air support, you have armor, you have infantry, you have electronic warfare, you have logistics, which is supply, you have reconnaissance and surveillance and satellite, like all of these different units work in concert. Now, this is incredibly difficult. This is like, getting the guy who knows how to play the flute and the violin, and then throwing them in a room and saying, in 3 months, we're going to have a real symphony. And it just wasn't. That's now how it works. It takes NATO armies constant drilling, years and years and years of constant drilling to maintain that kind of capability. And even then, it is hard. So it was never quite reasonable to expect Ukraine to learn this basically over the winter. And so what happened is on day one of the counteroffensive, Ukraine sent a bunch of tanks and infantry vehicles towards the first layer of defenses, and it got wiped out. And if you looked at video, it was just big blob of armor vehicles moving in a single file. Like, this is exactly what the Russians have been doing all war and getting decimated, right? And we've been laughing at the Russians for being so incompetent. Ukraine did the exact same thing because Ukraine is from that Soviet tradition, and its generals learn that kind of fighting, and it's not very effective against prepared positions. So that's when Ukraine had to step back and like reassess. And this is where a lot of the stories of like the counteroffensive has stalled. It's not going anywhere. There's these burning Western tanks, and of course Russia like chopped up the video and played them from 20 different angles, so it looked like there was like 200 destroyed tanks, but it was the same one.
What's the time frame on when Ukraine decided they had sort of like regroup, step back and regroup? Is that like a month ago or 2 months ago? Approximately when is that?
Yeah, it was at the very end of May when this happened. So we're talking June and July. And so what they did is sort of a variation of Soviet style doctrine. The way Russia did it around Bakhmut is that they would lay a layer of artillery, for a whole day, just pound the crap out of the position they were trying to take. Then they would send some infantry over, because if you sent armor, Ukraine would blow it up really easily with anti-tank. And nobody can, not even Ukrainians, nobody can operate at night, right? So you're doing it in daylight. Drones are watching all the way. Drones have changed the equation. Not only are they watching, but now there's suicide drones with explosive payloads. So you dive bombing drones at any approaching vehicle. So then they would send a bunch of infantry. And in the case of Bakhmut, the Russians were sending prison labor. So these were people that were pulled out of prison. So they literally sent them to die. It was a suicide. And they would go, and if they got shot, then they'd be like, oops, oh, well, that sucks. Now let's do another day of artillery bombardment.
Were those the Wagner mercenaries?
Yeah.
Okay. Just for those of you who are wondering, the group, and we'll get to this later, but the Wagner group, the group of mercenaries run by the late, Yevgeny Prigozhin, because it seems apparently he's dead now. He passed a week ago, but anyway, we'll get Putin. Probably assassinated, exactly. Right. So we'll get back to that, but this cannon fodder essentially that they were like, shoving in to like die just to make a foot at a time, advancement on Bakhmut, were these mercenaries pulled from jail and Russian jail and part of the Wagner group. Okay, so go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So that was Soviet doctrine. You lay artillery, send infantry. If they die, more artillery until they send infantry. And everybody's, the defenders are either dead or they retreated. And then you lather, rinse, and repeat. That's why it took him 9 months to take a single city. And that's why now Ukraine's version isn't sending cannon fodder to die. You can have drones, drones go in and you see if there's anything left over. You can send armored infantry vehicles. A lot of them get destroyed, but Western infantry vehicles have great armor. They protect the troops, which is what's important. We have a lot of other infantry vehicles. We can keep sending them for as long as Ukraine needs. We have thousands that have been decommissioned and in storage. And so it's just important to keep Ukrainian troops alive, because that's sort of that is irreplaceable. And then the other big factor was minefields. So Russia laid miles of minefields leading up to the main uh, defensive trench line system. And so getting through those destroyed a lot of vehicles to the point where they realized, we can't send more vehicles. It's too costly. So what they would do is, again, infantry would take advanced positions, and then you have sappers, which are combat engineers, come in at night to manually dig up thousands of mines. So very, very dangerous work, very time-consuming work. So they were advancing, but differently and slowly. And this gave rise to the, oh no, Ukraine is losing, they can't take territory. But the reality was that from a equipment standpoint, most of Ukraine's fighting brigades, these storm brigades, are still mostly intact. And yeah, they're taking casualties. Nobody's going to pretend that this is a septic war, but it's a lot of the equipment stuff is replaceable and it's protecting troops, and so it's just a lot slower and more methodical and more intentional. And so this idea that you can just send like a whole mass of tanks and armored vehicles across a field, to like trumpet music, and they would overwhelm Russian defenses, and within a week they would rout them. Like that just wasn't going to happen, not with all the mines and not without Ukraine's inability to engage in true combined arms warfare. So they've made it their own. And what's really interesting is that a week ago we had all these articles about how Ukraine needs to negotiate because they're not going to win because they're not getting anywhere in their counteroffensive. And in that week, they actually pierced that first major Surovikin line. So there is a lot of really good news coming from Ukraine right now. Russia does not seem to have the troops to properly man the lines because they're being rolled up shockingly quick. And it's not Ukraine announcing this. This is what's really funny. Ukraine's very tight-lipped. They're like very quiet about what's happening. This is video that the Russians are actually pushing out, where it's showing that Ukraine has advanced beyond the line in multiple locations. So
why would they push that video out?
So the video, there's one drone unit that's pushing them out, Russian drone unit, and it's suicide drones attacking Ukrainian positions. So I think they think they're like, look, we're killing Ukrainians. We just destroyed a Ukrainian truck. And so they think they're bragging about their, effectiveness at destroying the Ukrainian forces. But what they're doing is it's called geolocation. You look at a map, you compare to the tree lines and roads, and you go, and everybody's like, holy crap, like unexpectedly, like 4 or 5 days ago, we had the first video of Ukrainian forces on the other side of the Surovikin line. And people are like, that can't be real. It might be like a raiding party. And then a couple of days later, there was like a whole new, release of videos that showed that there's actually a much more pronounced presence on the other side. And Russia did this weird thing that I wrote about the entire since the start of the counteroffensive, and it's one of the reasons things have moved slowly, is that Ukraine would take a position and then like a little town. I mean, these are like little towns with like 300 people live in them. So we're not talking cities. Yeah. And then Russia would like counterattack and throw all these troops and equipment at trying to regain the territory they had lost. And it made no sense, because if you build these incredibly elaborate defensive lines, it makes sense to stick your troops in those defensive lines where they are protected. And it is incredibly difficult for Ukraine, for any attacker, to root out, to ferret out defending forces from well designed, well-built defensive emplacements. And the Surovikin line is, by all indications, a really solidly built, effective line. So why was Russia throwing its troops out in the open? So if you're Ukraine, it paid to kind of sit back, wait for them to send their waves of counterattacks and just lob artillery, and it was like shooting fish in a barrel. So that also slowed things down. And then the last factor that slowed the counteroffensive down is that Russia is artillery heavy. The doctrine is based on artillery, like we talked about, right? Not just attacking, but also defending. And so if you have a wave of incoming troops on both sides have done this, you lay a curtain of death, right? Just fire, just covered the field with artillery. It just absolutely wipes out anybody trying to cross across it. And Russia had a lot more artillery at the start of the war, and what they've been doing in the last 3 months is that they've been systematically targeting Russian artillery and the logistics that feed that artillery with shells. And so Ukraine has claimed, they went from, 6, 7 artillery kills claimed per day over the last year. At the start of the counteroffensive, they're claiming 25 to 35 destroyed Russian artillery batteries a day. Now, these are their claims, but a lot of it is actually verified, just visually verified, because they'll release the videos of the suicide drones, blowing up artillery or guided rockets. There's lots of ways that Ukraine has more range, has better Western gear that can reach out. So now what we're seeing advances, videos of advancing Ukrainian forces without any artillery response. And we haven't seen that before. So that also makes it easier to advance when you don't have to face this curtain of death in front of you. So all of this takes time, and really, there's no hurry. I mean, there's a different hurry that we can talk about, right, politically. But militarily, there's this idea where people say, well, it's got to happen before the fall rains, because it rains, it gets all muddy, and it's hard for armored vehicles to cross. But what we've seen is they're not using armored vehicles for maneuver warfare. What they're doing is they're using those armored vehicles to support the infantry from way back. And so infantry doesn't care about mud. Infantry can walk around the mud. I mean, they can wade through the mud. So this can continue indefinitely through the fall into the winter when that ground freezes up. And so if it's just a question of degrading Russian artillery, degrading Russian logistics, great. If Russia wants to keep counterattacking out in the open, fantastic, even better. And what we're finding now is that it took 2 months to breach the first defensive line around the city of Tokmak, which is one of the most strategic cities. In 1 week, they had breached the second one, and that second one is supposed to be the main line. The Surovikin line is the main line, and within a week, they had gotten behind it. So that suggests, again, it's not for sure, but it suggests that Russia ran out of troops by just throwing them out in the open, weirdly, for reasons that appear to be more political than military. Like nobody wanted to let Putin know that they lost a town, or Eurozone, that they lost a town of Robotyne, so like keep sending troops because we don't want to deliver that bad news to Putin. And so now their actual defensive line appears to be weirdly depleted. So fingers crossed.
Do you know how many? Do you know do we know approximately how many of these defensive lines there are? If they pierced the first one, they seem to have pierced the second one now. Do we know how many might be left? Or
there's again, because they're like, it's like a spider web, right? So it's it's not as easy to be like 1, 2, 3, 4.
I see.
And between every tree line has trenches, so it's not even. But the prepared lines are more sophisticated because they'll have an anti-tank ditch, and then they'll have the physical barriers and barbed wire, and then the infantry positions, and then vehicle fighting positions. So it's a little more intricate than just trenches. There are anywhere between 3 and 7, depending on how you count it. But it's like a spider web. I mean, it's going to be slow going. Now, what's really particularly noteworthy about this line, the Surovikin line, it's considered to be the hardest. One, it was the most intricately designed and had the most layers. So that was a big part of it. But it's also on the highest ridge line of that entire corner of the country. So Ukraine is attacking upwards. And militarily, that's the hardest thing to do. It don't matter if it's 100 feet. It attacking upwards, the defense has a huge, ginormous advantage. But what that's going to do is that when Ukraine takes that position, it's all downhill from there, all the way to the Azov Sea to cut off that land.
Just to give and I'm no military historian, but a mild, historical comparison is like, what Americans might be familiar with is D-Day and a bunch of Allied forces trying to run up the beaches of Normandy, at the Axis powers at Germany, and their dug in pill boxes and things like
Hmm.
that. So, I mean, we just people just ran into fire, just knowing that the guy before them might just get shot and they might be right up next. But anyway, that's what I think of when I think of, the difficulty of trying to ascend up a hill, and just people just kind of getting mowed down. I mean,
Yep, and the
so
Battle of
anyway.
Bunker Hill, like there's a lot of,
Mhm.
I mean, and these are not like attacking a mountaintop. I mean, these are hills. But
Right.
and so once Ukraine, and right now it looks like they're looping around, so they may be able to actually roll up that line without even having to hit it dead on, which would be like next level amazing. Once they have that, they'll have the heights. So then it'll be Ukraine that has the advantage, looking down on the Russian defense, much of the way down, as they move their way south. So it's again, it's the hardest line. There are others. Now, a defensive line is only as effective as the troops in it to actually to fight back, and this is where we're starting to see that curious situation where Ukraine is too easily penetrating the Surovikin line. Um, that just wouldn't be possible if it was actually fully manned and operated. So we're starting to suspect that Russia just doesn't have the troops anymore, that they wasted them, squandered them all out in the open. And again, so you have infantry. It's going to take a while for the armor to come in because you have the engineers and the sappers behind them clearing out the mines. And you can't just clear out a little lane, because then Russia just targets that one lane, right? So you gotta clear it off in a broad range. But by having the infantry, Ukrainian infantry in those trenches, obviously the sappers can operate behind with a lot more security and safety than having Russians in the trenches firing down on those troops.
Right. Okay. So some positive news. None of this. Americans have a very short attention span. We like quick wins.
Yeah,
Big. It's
the myth of the
bold.
quick war, quick war, quick
Yeah.
war.
The quick war, the shock and awe war that went on for I don't know
Yeah.
what 20 years. So something like that. Anyway, who's counting? Um, so good news. It might not be happening on our timeline, but it seems like it's good news. Let me just ask this. Is there any way in which the apparent assassination of this leader of the Wagner group, for those you might remember, there was suddenly this armed rebellion marching towards Moscow, and it was led by the Wagner group and Yevgeny Prigozhin, who I may be slaughtering his name, and he, and they all of a sudden they realized they just they basically marched. They were like within 100 miles of Moscow
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something. It was crazy.
And there was
They got so
nothing,
close. There's nothing. No
nothing in a
one. There's
way.
no
No
resistance.
troops, no
Nothing.
nothing.
No, nothing. And so then they were like, okay, maybe we should call this off, because the next thing is that we take Moscow, right? And then at that
Yeah.
point, you're pretty crossways with Putin. So, anyways, the leader of that group has apparently been assassinated. May have seen the news that he was listed as being a passenger on a plane that got downed. I think maybe by an explosive. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
It seemed
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
there was maybe a bomb on the plane or something like that. I mean, it's still a little murky. It's been confirmed that he's been on the plane. Who's responsible for that plane dropping out of the sky is still, unverified, let's say, officially. But I mean,
There's
we
lots
don't have
of
to
there's lots
guess.
of conspiracy theories. We don't and just his associates say that he was on a plane, but that could all be a ruse to, like, and he's hiding, and he's in Argentina or something. But I think we can
His
pretty
own
much
assassination. I mean,
assume,
you never know.
until we know otherwise, that he was assassinated, and not only him, but also the top core leadership of the Wagner group was all on that plane. So
And most
and they were flying to Moscow to talk to Putin, and because Putin
Putin.
gave him apparently part of the negotiations was that he got an amnesty. And this just goes to remind you, like, nobody, you don't make a deal with Putin. You can't
Oh,
negotiate with Russia.
never. I mean, most people have been, as soon as that happened, as soon as that march happened, that armed rebellion happened, everybody was like, he's got days, weeks,
Yeah,
maybe months, but probably not. So
yeah.
this seems all within the realm of Putin pushing anyone who he
Yeah.
doesn't like out a window. So,
Mhm.
but here's what I do wonder: Does is that figuring? I mean, that is it. They were fighting a lot of, like we talked about in Bakhmut. This is the reason I brought it up. A lot of the Russian troops were being reinforced by these mercenaries who they were using as cannon fodder that were from the Wagner group. I know that a lot of the Wagner group, the people who were left, some of them have been, sort of just consumed or subsumed by the Russian military. They've just been sucked into the Russian military. But they're not the force that they were. Do you think that's part of what is happening? Is that having any material effect on the war, in your opinion?
The Wagner was sort of two parts, right? They had about 30,000 contract professional soldiers, mercenaries. And then they were recruiting the prison fodder, and those are the ones that were sending in human waves to, during the attack on. They weren't
Mhm.
sending their own like,
I see.
real
Okay.
soldiers. They were sending the prison fodder. The prison fodder
Right.
has been what was left over of it, and reportedly, at least 20,000 of them were killed, in the attack on Bakhmut. Those guys, I think, have been subsumed into penal units in the Russian army, but they're literally like they don't even give them weapons. They just go out there and step on landmines, and so
Oh
they're there to
God.
identify Ukrainian defensive positions. Oh, they're firing
Oh
from
my
over
goodness.
there. Okay, now we can target that with artillery. So, yeah, it is the absolute worst of worst jobs.
God, I thought they
But
were at least like, running into a you know, bunch of bullets carrying some
oh,
sort of weapon. I mean,
no,
that's
in
like,
fact, you'd send the
ugh.
first wave, and the first wave would have a backpack full of ammo, and when they'd go down, then the next wave would pick up that backpack, and until they got to wherever the position was that they wanted to go. And so it was, I mean, it
It's
was
so grim. It's
so
so grim.
brutal,
Uh,
very Russian
So,
in
yeah,
context.
very Russian.
But so the professional Wagnerites are out of the war, and that's about an army of about 30,000. And not only the numbers aren't, if you have 300,000 Russian troops in Ukraine, 30,000 is like, okay, 10%, big deal. But they had experience, they were trained, they're actually good soldiers. And while the Russian military has been trying to recruit them, by all indications, that is going very poorly.
Mm.
And so a lot of these mercenaries they're quitting. There's a lot of muttering about revenge, and I don't think much will come of it. There's no real leadership to organize any kind of uprising. But what you do is you have a bunch of really disgruntled, experienced mercenaries who are like, "F you," and like, we're not gonna go to your
It's
side.
never good for a leader
Mm,
of a
no.
country that isn't super popular and his war is not going super well. And you don't want any armed, like, well, they may not
Prigozhin,
be
yeah.
armed, but yeah. Yeah, sorry, go
Prigozhin
ahead.
he took a major city, Rostov-on-Don. In That was the first major city that his rebellion captured, and people came out and cheered. Like, it was literally that whole, like, flower, rose petals,
Yeah.
that reaction, and Putin saw that,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and so there is clearly a desire. And now, to be very clear, Prigozhin's a war criminal. He is
Yeah. He was
about the
he was
most
no
worst
saint.
of the worst, and the people he attracts are right wing. I mean, just think of like the worst of our right wing MAGA people who wanted Russia to use nuclear weapons to, like, I mean, because we're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. It's just like the worst of the right wing bloodthirsty Russians. That's who he was like rallying. So let's not sit there and go like he was some kind of freedom fighter or a hero. Um, Good thing he's dead. I wish he would have taken Putin with him, but
Yeah.
nobody's gonna. Yeah, no, I don't think anybody's gonna actually miss him. But so his people are these like right wing, not literally Nazi types, like Nazi tattoos, far right, white nationalist, virulently anti-gay, anti-brown people, anti everything that's not like pure white Slavic. Russian ethnicity. So, yeah, and they're at this point they're sitting the war out. That helps for sure. It helps not having to deal with them. And who knows? Maybe they'll be a destabilizing force in Russian politics for a while to come.
Right, and do you think that makes I saw some, op-ed, within the past couple days, was like, now that Prigozhin's dead, maybe, Putin's more likely to negotiate. Is that magical thinking?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Probably.
the idea there
Okay,
is that Prigozhin was pushing from the right, from the nationalist right, and not to make any concessions. Um, there is clearly signal from Russia, from their troll farms and their paid influencer campaign to push for negotiations. And I think they realize that they are stuck right now, and they're being pushed back, and their lines are collapsing, and so they want to freeze the conflict right now. And it's about peace. It's about a ceasefire. People need to stop dying. What they can do is then they can spend 2-3 years rebuilding until the next phase of the war. And
right.
and so everybody knows, like, the Ukraine war started in 2014. So this has been an ongoing conflict, and so this idea that
Okay,
a ceasefire would stop is
alright.
yeah.
So, real quick, because we need to get to domestic and we're moving
Oh yeah.
slow. I mean, I've been interested, but and hopefully everybody else is too. Stick with us. We're getting to the good stuff. Yeah, like just recently now, the Ukrainians are. This is quick. Are getting trained on F-16s. Big deal or not big deal?
Yeah,
Their
I'm in
air
the
power is
camp.
going to be increased.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm in the camp that it's not a big deal. A lot of people claim that Ukraine has moved slowly because they can't do combined arms without aircraft, and
Mhm.
NATO is definitely heavily dependent on air power. The thing is that they do have aircraft, right? It's the stuff that suicide drones are doing, that long range rocket artillery is doing. It's exactly the sort of thing that air power is designed to do, which is to target individual vehicles and destroy defensive infantry and equipment. So they don't lack the functionality of air support. Now, what it'll be nice if they're given long range missiles is that Russia has these freaking ginormous bombs, and they put wings on them, and then they can lob them from 40 miles behind enemy lines. So Russia also doesn't have air superiority. Nobody has air superiority. There's too many air defenses. But they'll launch these bombs from 40 miles out, and these bombs like pack a huge punch, and they're actually probably Russia's most effective weapon right now. So what F-16s will be able to do is, with the right missiles, it'll be able to hit those Russians from that distance. And I suspect that not a lot of them will, but what it will do is it will force Russia to push them even further back, which will make them even less
Right.
effective, or less effective to just stop using them,
Right.
because
Right.
Russia is very sensitive to losing planes, and doesn't like to risk them. So a lot of it is just, I think that's going to be the biggest factor. Second one is they'll be able to launch long range anti ship missiles, and so they can sit there over Ukrainian territory and target Russian naval ships at other Sevastopol naval base, which is at the southern tip of Crimea. And so again, what it'll do is it'll push that naval fleet closer to mainland Russia, away from there, just because they don't want to risk. It'll be, and those ships launch a lot of the rockets and missiles that have been hitting civilian targets this last year. So it'd be nice to get them out of the way. It wouldn't make a big difference on the front line right now, but on a more macro level, yeah, it will help.
Okay, so let's turn to domestic. Now, the good news is that anybody who listens to us regularly, we have spent some time on the Republican Party, obviously the debate going on in the Republican primary on foreign policy. We talked a little bit in both of the last episodes, I think, about this. Well, maybe no, in the last episode, I guess, because we were 2 episodes ago, we were pre-debate, but Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy going after each other on foreign policy. Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador, also former governor of South Carolina, with real foreign policy experience, taking the side of Ukraine and saying we cannot abandon them. We are trying to prevent a world war. And Vivek Ramaswamy, you are a, a piece of like ignorant. I don't know. I'm not going to say it, but anyway, she was very annoyed by him and said, "You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows. It shows." And she was extremely and he was doing the Trump thing. We should just end the war and just basically like give Ukraine to Putin. I mean, that's essentially what he was
I mean,
saying. Okay.
literally,
Yeah.
not even the
Not even
consequences
essentially.
of his no, because there's
Yeah.
like, if you do X, the consequence will be that Putin wins, right? No, he's literally saying give Putin what he wants.
Yeah.
That's his policy.
So,
Yeah.
okay. Here we are. And I think just I guess I would just ask the question of in terms of where we are on foreign policy. Like how is how is this playing the fact that the Republican Party is in this debate? And I will say, Haley actually, remember last episode we were talking about how Vivek was having this like mini boomlet that Trump had dropped off a little bit. Vivek was coming up. Okay, I just rechecked the numbers this morning, and both nationally and in a lot of statewide polling, Haley has actually moved up. Okay, so she's actually moved up into like a third place position in Iowa.
Okay.
I don't want anyone to think that like I'm saying Haley's going to not, like take this, but right now in Iowa, it's mostly Trump, DeSantis, and Haley, right? And then New Hampshire, it's looking kind of like a similar thing where she's moved up into the space where either Tim Scott or Vivek was. So, she may have gotten something out of that. She may have gotten a real boost, a legitimate boost. But what is it doing? What kind of effect is it having that this is the type of debate that the Republican Party is engaged in, while President Joe Biden is, holding together a very strong coalition of Western partners who have been, supplying and backing Ukraine, and now the Republicans are saying, like, the Trump part of the Republican Party is like, we should just cut and run. Just tell that, like, we can, first of all, the hubris of we can tell the Ukrainians what to do, but like, what kind of effect is this having?
I mean, right now, roughly 70% of the Republican primary electorate is supporting a candidate that is Ukraine skeptic, wants to either withdraw or hand things over to Putin. They went out. They'll share those ridiculous memes. Will show like Lahaina, and they'll say like, "We can spend money on Ukraine, but we can't spend money on Hawaii." It's like, we can do both. Believe it or not, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
We
And
need troops at the southern border.
yeah, right. I mean, and a lot of that equipment, a lot of that money that we were sending to Ukraine, it's actually obsolete equipment that we're actually paying to keep stored and maintained, which is actually going to save us money in the long run, because we need to maintain these old vehicles. And so it is things would probably be different had Zelensky done what Donald Trump had asked him to do, and to make up some fake Hunter Biden investigation back in 2020, right? This is the reason that Trump got impeached the first time, and you almost forget that this is all connected. That this was it's all connected. And so Trump has got a real hate on for Ukraine and Zelensky, because Zelensky didn't play along with his fake scheme. And then his acolytes are following along, not because they actually really love Putin, or it's because their God savior cult leader has told them that Putin good, Zelensky bad, and that's as that's as deep as they want to go with that. Now, it is problematic from I know international partners have got to be nervous that if Trump were to somehow win again next year, that it would not only probably, it would absolutely mean the end of American aid to Ukraine, but also could potentially be the end of NATO, because Trump has made it very clear he wants out of NATO. And I don't think a second term Trump would be constrained the way that a lot of the adults in the room constrained him, because he wanted out of NATO the first term and he was sort of talked out of it. I think he would be emboldened a second time to do whatever he wanted without any consequences or regards. And he would do a better job of surrounding himself with all the conspiracy cranks, and there'd be no adults in that room. So the allies understand it. And I actually got to think that Biden has to understand this. And so there's a lot of slow walking, a lot of support, including, we should announce that we're gonna send our own F-16s, not just Europeans. We should announce long range rocket systems, cruise missiles. we should announce those things because it is in Biden's interest, not just Ukraine, but in Biden's own personal political interest to have a Ukrainian victory to celebrate heading into the November elections next year, as opposed to dragging these things out. And then
Absolutely.
there's this weird, like, oh, we don't want to provoke Russia. They're provoked. I mean, they
Yeah.
invaded Ukraine. There's nothing else they can do at this point except nuclear weapons, and nobody thinks they're going to use. Even they say they're not going to use nuclear weapons. Every once in a while, they threaten it, but they're not going to use nuclear weapons. And so the I don't understand, after so effectively leading this coalition and rallying the Europeans, that the Europeans have now like ran past us, being more aggressive in supporting Ukraine than the U.S. We should be announcing. I mean, we announce tanks and armored vehicles piecemeal. Oh, we're going to send 30 and we're going to send 60. What if Biden said, you know what, we're sending 1,000 tanks and 3,000 armored vehicles. We're giving them everything we have. Putin, you can't win this thing. Like, how does that change the equation? Then trickling out a few dozen vehicles at a time. And then Putin thinks, okay, if I can hold out long enough to the 2024 election, and if Trump wins, I got this. Just announce it all, get that into a supplemental spending bill, send it all over. This is all surplus material, right? So you're not paying full price for this equipment. And then the 2024 election doesn't give Putin a bailout situation, and we're at a situation where, like, okay, Biden can say, yeah, we've done everything. Like, they got it all.
Right.
They got everything. All our surplus stuff. They have it, and then there's challenges training Ukrainians and then providing logistics. So it's not like everybody thinks you can just send everything at once. You can't. But you can announce it all. And then, you can deliver it as Ukraine's ability to absorb it via trained personnel and their logistics system. But it's already been announced, and then Putin knows, like, okay, crap, like, I mean, we're not going to degrade Ukraine.
Let me take just a few minutes here to run over a couple of the domestic political, things related to this, and then give you a last word on it. Okay. So just so everybody knows, if there's, I'm not a foreign policy expert. I do pay attention to the polling. And, right now I will say there's not as much support for continuing to support Ukraine. Okay. And that's not just among Republicans. There's like, I can't remember the exact number, but it's somewhere in the 50s, low 50s. People think that we've already done enough for Ukraine. And are we not doing enough for Ukraine is somewhere in like 45 plus 45, 48%, something like that. So, there's a slight lean in the American public right now among all voters, right? That maybe we've done enough. Okay. I don't believe that. I wouldn't argue for that.
No,
I totally agree with what Marcos is saying. We should just be throwing everything we have at that, because the sooner the sooner Ukraine wins that war, the sooner we win that war, right? So and they are fighting for their sovereignty, but they are fighting for the Western world, for democracy. Okay, I want to say one other thing. The reason to not slow walk that too, we're seeing it right now in the Senate Republican Conference with Mitch McConnell, who in the past couple of months has had 2 episodes where he's literally frozen for like 30 seconds at a time during a press conference. He is not well. He's frail. He's thin. And he is actually a big proponent of, we need to be on Ukraine's side. We need to fund blah, blah, blah. Kevin McCarthy's job, as far as he's concerned, is just continuing to hold the gavel. He isn't working for the American people. He's not even working for Trump. He wakes up every day thinking, how can I continue to hold the gavel? I think, if he didn't have to, if it was no skin off his nose, he would probably fund go ahead and fund Ukraine. But he's got this real right-wing part of, extremist, not just a small faction, but an extremist faction of the Republican caucus in the House that doesn't want to fund Ukraine, that doesn't believe. They're taking the Trump position, and they're willing to shut down the government and all kinds of stuff, right? So the longer this war goes on, I wouldn't be surprised if, the numbers don't get that much better with the American public. And on top of that, then, the people who actually champion in the Republican Party, who actually seem invested in continuing to fund Ukraine, the McConnell wing of the party, is is losing steam. I mean, if he's like a symbolic representative of the fact that the McConnell wing of the party is is at the moment descending.
Yeah,
Well,
it's in decline. Yeah.
decline. So, the sooner we finish what Putin started, okay? Putin
Yeah.
started it. The sooner we finish what Putin started, we bring that to a close, the better for everyone, the better for the White House, the better for Biden politically, the better for Ukraine, the better for Democrats, the better for democracy. Otherwise, it's just a continuing uphill battle because, if I mean, I've made my point. I
Yeah.
There's a whole
It's
lot of
even.
domestic reasons to go
Yeah.
hard at it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
No, and
last
Republicans are
word for
gonna,
you.
yeah, they're rallying around it. One of their excuses is that we need to focus on China, and yeah, it's going to be a lot easier to focus on China if there's no Russia threatening Europe. Like you literally are having Ukraine decimate and destroy Russia's military might. That completely opens up the our ability to really focus strategically on bolstering democracy and our allies in Asia. So there is no real counter argument to Ukraine aid other than they are pissed off that Zelensky didn't play along, and so therefore they have their hate on, and they're going to pretend to be isolationists, but not when they're talking about China. Suddenly they're not isolationists anymore. They want to talk tough about China, and not really. They're the same. They're the same. They are right now. They are allied, and they will work together. And the best thing you can do to really deter China from making any move on Taiwan or any other neighbors is to show them the consequences of doing so. And that means being united. It means being single focused on victory, on defending those principles of national sovereignty and democracy and human rights. And when you do that, then it's a lot easier than Xi's calculations in China become a lot more difficult. Taiwan doesn't look that easy after all. And what happens to our economy if the whole West shuts us down and so on and so forth? So the political situation is just going to get worse. It's really easy to agitate against foreign spending, foreign donations of any kind, right? I mean, this has always been
All right.
demonized, even though the overall foreign budget, the
Oh
foreign
God, it's like
assistance budget, it's
it's a
10 billion
pittance.
out of trillions of dollars. It's nothing.
Pittance.
It's
Yeah.
easily demonized, and then this is a much bigger number than the $10 billion that we send to other nations. So the Republicans are gonna keep agitating towards it. Clearly, the MAGA crowd is on it. The memes are flying fast and furious, and there's a schedule. I don't think there's a military schedule. I think Ukraine's going to need to do what it needs to do, and it may take some time to liberate all of their territory. But there is a political schedule, which is why I think it's important for Biden to move faster to commit a large number of military aid, even if we can't deliver it overnight. Just commit it. Send Putin that message that that Donald Trump can't bail him out, and then do everything we can to, because the constant, and this is my last thought, the constant refrain from the West is we'll support Ukraine as long as it takes, which is freaking stupid. Support Ukraine to win as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want a endless as quickly as possible, which means you got to open the coffers, send everything they can right now, train them. It ain't going to happen this year, but if we can actually prepare for a decisive summer 2024 campaign and let Joe Biden ride that into election night. Big victor, savior of Ukraine. Like, it'd be freaking brilliant. So
It would be
that
amazing. Yeah, it would be.
that would be the best case scenario, and it takes much more bold action than we're seeing from Biden.
And
He started great.
the
He's
best
gotten cold
the
feet.
best Trump and all of them could do with that is it wasn't Biden. Kamala Harris was pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Oh man, it would be fun to see them try to to diminish that. So that's where we are. And I think, Carrie, I think that's the show, right? And this is a longer show than
Absolutely.
usual because I said I could do my soliloquy, and I could soliloquy forever. So
questions. I drew you out. All right.
So thank you so much. Thanks,
yeah,
Carrie.
we hardly ever talk about this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks, Carrie, for the great questions and the great moderating of this discussion. Thanks to Walter for producing and everybody that helps behind the scenes, like Paul. And thank you, the viewer, listener, reader, writer, participant in the Daily Kos world and our efforts to protect our democracy and save it from the MAGA movement that seeks to literally end it. I mean, now they're saying that they don't like democracy. They're literally anti-democracy now. We knew they'd get there, but they're finally get there. And that might even be worth a show.
Democracy is terrible. That's the new thing. Oh, God.
We're a republic, not a democracy. We don't want mob rule. So this is real. It's a real threat. It ain't going away anytime soon. So it takes all of us. It's going to take a huge effort for all of us to win next year, not just for Ukraine, but for us in our own democracy. A lot is at stake. So I'm glad to have you guys with us. I love you all. I appreciate you more than you can imagine. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like, share, recommend, do all those things, and see you guys next week. Thanks a lot.